Welcome to Things You Don't Know, Quick and Quirky. Here is something so ordinary that you probably have a box of them somewhere in the house, and you seldom think about them. Matches. You scrape a little wooden stick across a rough surface, there's a flash, and suddenly you have fire on demand.
And what makes that remarkable is that human beings had controlled fire for hundreds and thousands of years. Yet for most of that time, starting a new fire was inconvenient. People used friction, flint and steel, glowing embers, tinderboxes, and various chemical contraptions. But there was no cheap little stick that you could just pull out and ignite in a second.
And the modern match is surprisingly recent. The practical friction match dates only to the 1820s, which means railroads were appearing, factories were spreading, and steam engines were already changing society before somebody finally figured out how to put reliable fire on the end of a stick. There had been earlier attempts to make fire starting easier. In China, sulfur treated sticks were reportedly being used centuries ago to help transfer an existing flame, while Europeans later experimented with devices involving phosphorus, sulfuric acid, and other chemicals.
But those weren't matches in the modern sense. Some required you to dip a prepared stick into acid, while others depended on containers of reactive chemicals. So the person trying to light a candle could end up handling something considerably more troublesome and dangerous than the candle.
Yeah, what people really needed was a small object that carried its own ignition system. You would rub it against something, friction would provide the initial energy, and a controlled chemical reaction would take over from there.
Yeah, now that brings us to an English chemist and druggist named John Walker, who lived in Stockton-on-Tees. In 1826, Walker was experimenting with combustible chemical mixtures when some of the material dried on the end of a stick that he had been using.
Dr. Weaver, according to the traditional account, Walker scraped the coated stick against the stone near his fireplace to remove the dried material. Instead of simply coming off, the material suddenly ignited, and Walker realized that the friction itself could provide the trigger.
That's right, and the important part here of the invention wasn't nearly discovering something that burned. Chemists already knew plenty of substances that would burn. Walker's insight was turning friction into a convenient way of starting that reaction on a portable stick.
Walker began selling his invention, which he called friction lights. His surviving business ledger records a sale on April 7, 1827, making it the earliest documented commercial sale of his friction matches.
They weren't quite the little matches we know today. Uh-uh. Walker sold them with a piece of rough glass paper, rather, it's like sandpaper, and the match had to be pulled sharply across it to produce ignition.
And by modern standards, these were substantial matches. Early versions were several inches long, and Walker eventually sold them in batches with a metal container and a striking material included.
Yeah, Walker made a decision that probably cost him a fortune. He did not patent the friction match. Accounts differ somewhat about the exact reasoning, but he apparently believed the invention was useful enough that it should be available to the public rather than tightly controlled.
Other manufacturers, Dr. Weaver did not share that attitude. Competitors quickly copied and modified the idea, manufactured matches more cheaply, and pushed Walker's original product aside.
And Dr. Dineen, that gives us one of the stranger stories in invention history. John Walker helped transform everyday life, But the enormous match industry that followed, well, it was largely built by other people. How about that?
Awful. One of those competitors was a London chemist named Samuel Jones, who sold an improved version under a wonderfully dramatic name, the Lucifer match. Lucifer means roughly light bringer, so the name was actually appropriate before its darker religious association with the devil became dominant in popular culture.
Yeah, you could argue there is a connection there. Lucifer, Satan, devil, fire, hot, you know? The word caught on so well that Lucifer became another word for a match in parts of Europe. The problem was that early lucifers could be temperamental, producing an unpleasant smell, sparks, and occasionally a rather violent ignition.
So the early match had achieved convenience without quite achieving safety. Manufacturers therefore kept experimenting, and one of those improvements produced a match that was wonderfully easy to ignite and dangerously poisonous. During the 1830s, manufacturers began using white phosphorus in match heads. It made matches much easier to ignite, including versions that could be struck on a variety of rough surfaces. But white phosphorus is highly toxic.
The people who paid the worst price were factory workers exposed to phosphorus fumes. Some developed phosphorus necrosis of the jaw, better known by the horrifying nickname Phossy jaw, in which jaw tissue and bone deteriorated, causing infections, tooth loss, severe disfigurement, and sometimes death.
Now, this wasn't simply some unknown danger discovered generations later. No, the health problem became notorious during the 19th century. Yet, white phosphorus continued to be used because the matches were cheap and popular. Medical reports describe workers suffering destructive injuries that could require extensive removal and diseased bone.
The danger helped produce an important episode in the history of labor. In 1888, roughly 1,400 mostly female workers at the Bryant and May Match Factory in London's East End, a poor area at the time, went on strike over low wages, harsh fines, bad working conditions, and repeated phosphorus exposure.
These women worked extraordinarily long hours in an environment where phosphorus poisoning was a genuine occupational danger. Their strike succeeded in winning important workplace changes and became a landmark in the development of organized labor in Britain.
Now, think about the contrast involved here. Consumers received one of the cheapest conveniences of the industrial age, while some of the people manufacturing that convenience were risking their health simply by just going to work.
Meanwhile, Swedish chemists were developing a much better solution. In 1844, Gustav Pasch patented an important form of the safety match, and the Lundstrom brothers later improved the design and successfully manufactured it on a large scale in Sweden.
The brothers' brilliant idea was to separate chemicals that earlier matches had combined. Instead of putting dangerous white phosphorus in the match head, the safer form, known as red phosphorus, could be placed on the striking surface on the side of the box.
And that explains why a safety match normally won't ignite when you simply rub it across the tabletop. The match and the box are essentially two parts of the same ignition system, and bringing them together with friction starts the chemical sequence. So, when you strike a modern safety match, the flame isn't coming from just friction alone. Friction produces enough heat to begin a reaction involving the chemicals on a striking strip and in the match head.
That reaction ignites the head, and the flame then transfers onto the wooden splint. The wood is commonly treated with wax or paraffin so that the flame travels smoothly from the head into the stick instead of simply flashing and disappearing.
And even the choice of wood matters, ladies and gentlemen. Aspen has traditionally been useful because it is relatively straight grained, does not contain troublesome resin, burns evenly, and absorbs paraffin well. According to Sweden's Match Museum, one aspen log can yield about 370,000 matches.
Wow, wow. There are still two familiar basic types. A safety match is intended to work on its specially prepared striking surface, while a strike anywhere match contains a different chemical pattern that allows ignition on a suitably rough surface.
So that old movie trick of somebody striking a match on a wall, their boot, or some other object, therefore, isn't completely imaginary. But not every modern match will do it, and the safety match system deliberately makes accidental ignition more difficult.
And see, that's one of those cases where a slight inconvenience is actually the feature. Requiring the box means the matches are considerably less likely to start burning simply because they were jostled against something rough. Then someone looked at the wooden matchbox and decided even that was too bulky. And in the United States, Philadelphia patent attorney Joshua Pusey received a patent in 1892 for what we called flexible matches, an important predecessor of the modern paper matchbook.
Matchbooks soon developed another purpose besides carrying fire: advertising. Restaurants, hotels, nightclubs, political campaigns, stores, and tobacco companies realized that the cover was a miniature billboard that customers carried away with them.
By the 1920s, advertising matchbooks had become enormously popular in the United States. For much of the 20th century, opening a kitchen drawer and finding matchbooks from banks, restaurants, hotels, and other businesses was almost like discovering a paper record of where somebody had been. The modern equivalent is probably their internet history.
Okay, I think that's a stretch. Manufacturers also developed specialized matches. Storm matches have an extended combustible coating that helps them continue burning in strong wind, and waterproof varieties, yeah, they make them, are designed for camping, military use, survival kits, and other places where an ordinary cardboard box would quickly become useless.
Long fireplace matches solve a different problem by keeping your fingers farther from the flame. Other oversized matches are used for grills, stoves, candles, and fireplaces, where reaching the ignition point with a short match would be kind of awkward.
And for generations, matches also performed jobs that have largely since disappeared. They lit gas lamps, kerosene lamps, coal and wood stoves, furnaces, cigarettes, pipes, laboratory burners, and countless household fires before electric igniters and disposable lighters made many of these tasks automatic.
Dr. Dineen, you're talking about lighters. What I find interesting is that matches survived the lighter. Disposable lighters are convenient and electronic ignition is everywhere, but boxes of matches are still sold around the world.
Part of that reason is simplicity. A dry safety match requires no battery, no valve, pressurized fuel reservoir, or moving mechanism, and individual matches can remain usable for many years if they're stored properly.
Dr. Weaver, there's also something unusually precise about them. You use one match, obtain one small flame, and when the stick is gone, the device is gone too. For candles, fireplaces, emergency kits, and camping, that simplicity remains useful. And matches created their own collecting hobby. collecting matchboxes, matchbook covers, and match labels is known as philumeny, a word that most people will probably encounter for the first time right now. I know I did.
Me too, Dr. Dineen. Matchbox labels became miniature works of commercial art, showing animals, machines, famous places, advertising slogans, national symbols, and sometimes political propaganda. Sweden's match industry alone produced thousands of different export designs.
One
Pretty
part,
cool, huh?
yeah, one particularly eccentric collector was King Farouk of Egypt, who reportedly once chartered an airplane to Copenhagen specifically to obtain a matchbox cover.
Really?
Yeah. When people start chartering aircraft to acquire the packaging, you have officially moved beyond simply needing something to light the stove. The remarkable thing about the match isn't that humanity discovered fire in the 19th century. Obviously, we didn't. What changed was that fire became portable, cheap, immediate, and individually controlled in a way it had never been before.
John Walker's accidental discovery turned a laboratory curiosity into something nearly anyone could carry. The dangerous phosphorus era then demonstrated that technological convenience can come with hidden costs, while the Swedish safety match showed how redesigning something as simple as a match head could eliminate much of that danger.
And now the device is so ordinary that we hardly notice it. 200 years after Walker scraped that chemical coated stick against his hearth, we're still striking descendants of the same basic idea and still getting a flame in about 1 second.
Okie dokie. Well, that's today's quick and quirky from things you don't know. Sometimes the biggest historical changes aren't enormous machines or famous inventions. Sometimes they're about 3 inches long and come in a box. So, thank you for joining us today. For Dr. Dineen and Chandler Foster, I welcome you to come back and join us for more interesting things. Bye for now.